Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you are listening to The Sounds of Film, and I'm so excited to have on the phone with us today some legends, documentary filmmakers, Chris Hegedus and D.A. Pennebaker. They are some of the most respected documentary filmmakers in the world, in history actually, and they're known for a very distinct style of filmmaking where they record moments. They shoot in the cinema verite style, and they follow their subjects around, very often not even interviewing them. They're known for some of the most popular documentaries in history, including some that you'll recognize, like The War Room, Monterey Pop, Don't Look Back, Kings of Pastry, Startup.com, and many others. In 2013, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences recognized D.A. Pennebaker's body of work with an Oscar for Lifetime Achievement. Their latest film, out on DVD, is Unlocking the Cage. It's a documentary about Stephen Weiss and his lawsuit seeking personhood for a chimpanzee, or chimpanzees. Chris, D.A., thank you so much for joining us on The Sounds of Film.
Okay, right. Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to speaking to both of you. I do want to just get one thing out of the way, which is to let you know, if you didn't realize already, that this show airs on WUSB, which is located at Stony Brook University, who's featured prominently in your film.
Oh, right. Yes, indeed. We spent a little time there.
Yeah, so they don't interfere with my program in any way, not that they would, but the show is independently produced. But Stony Brook University is a big part of this movie. That being said, I have to say, like, even though I had heard about this case, I didn't realize that this documentary was going to delve into this court case against Stony Brook in such detail. Before we get really into it, just for our listeners, can you explain a little bit about who Stephen Weiss is and what his mission was in bringing this lawsuit on behalf of certain animals?
Yeah, Steve Weiss is an animal rights lawyer who, for the past 30 years, has been trying to get more meaningful protections for animals. And during his long journey of protecting mostly dogs in kind of bad dog cases, he realized that the problem was that animals are things, they're property, and as such, they don't have any rights. And so he thought that the best way to get meaningful protections for animals beyond the type of protections that they have with animal statutes and, protection laws of that kind, which are very minimal, and they're very hard to get somebody to kind of affect them for the animal.
The enforcement is very loose.
So he decided that the best way was to try to argue that they're a person, a legal person, and therefore they should have a right to bodily liberty and not be killed. And he decided that the best way to argue for this was to argue for animals that are known to be some of the most studied animals for their cognitive abilities. That would be the great apes, elephants, and dolphins, whales, orcas. And so he looked around the United States for the best place to argue his case, and he decided to argue it under habeas corpus statute, and argue it that these animals were being imprisoned illegally. And he mounted his first cases in New York with chimpanzees. And we decided to follow him when he started this journey.
Well, it's a remarkable story, and one of the things I like about this movie is that it's sort of philosophical in nature, with a lot of the questions that are raised. The movie made me think about some other movies, like The Corporation, and other films that I've seen recently related to the meat industry and abortion. I never realized before, your film really concentrates on this topic, the idea that personhood, the concept of personhood, is such a major concept in U.S. law. You did explain it, but can you explain it a little bit more? Because one of the points that Stephen makes in the film is that corporations can be considered a person, and that there's so many debates in all different kinds of areas that come up that have to do with this concept. And I thought it was a really interesting tack that Stephen takes in this movie as it relates to animals.
Well, the fact is that if you buy any animal, a dog, a cat, a chimpanzee, an elephant, it's a possession, and it belongs to you. And if you choose to kill it, you can do so, and you're not in any way going against the law. Although there might be inhumane things, actions that could be brought against you, but the fact is that a person is born, and immediately, as a person, they become. The law protects them. That is, you can't take them as slaves. You can't injure them. You can't do anything without crossing the law. So that an animal, it's a divide between animals and people, and it's a huge divide, and it's one that Steve, all his life, has he's kind of struggled against it, because from his position, and he was a lawyer for dogs. He would go into court when your dog had bitten somebody, and the court you can decide you're going to have him put down, and he would go in to defend the dog. And he says he only lost one case. So you can see from the very beginning, he was always a person sort of on the side of dogs and animals in general, and that's what led him finally to decide that the only way you can really protect animals is to get the law on their side.
I mean, in general, a person is not a biological principle in the law. It's really an entity that can bear rights, that can be entitled to have some type of rights. And so, Steve was kind of arguing on that idea, and that's, some of the idea of why a corporation has rights. It's an entity that kind of has some rights given to it, and it's made it kind of the legal construct that is a person. And Steve believes that certain animals, have the cognitive capabilities similar to us. That chimpanzees are autonomous. They're social groups. They have communities. They understand theory of mind. They have the type of qualities that enable them, like us, to have some type of right.
It's a really interesting argument. In the film, you get the sense that the judges that he makes his case in front of are very reluctant to possibly...
I have no idea what he's talking about, really. That's the problem for them. There's nothing like this has ever come before them, and they don't want to be the first to make a judgment call until the last judge. And she was definitely kind of on his side. That was a marvelous moment that nobody, we kind of hadn't expected, but it was a big break for the film.
It was a remarkable moment. I was just wondering, though, just by coincidence, I had just interviewed the director of Cowspiracy, the documentary, and I just couldn't help but wonder. It's not really in your movie per se, but like I was saying, it seemed like the judges were very reluctant. Maybe they just didn't want to be the first. But I was wondering if there was anything that you noticed that maybe didn't make it into the film, that there was like maybe some behind the scenes pressuring from the cattle industry or something like that. Because if this case really caught on, and it was possible to make the case that animals or certain animals should have the right to personhood, then the whole floodgate would open. And I think this is mentioned in the movie, that people would just start bringing up lawsuits left and right, and the whole meat industry could be shut down.
Well, I mean, Steve doesn't go there in a lot of ways. I mean, that kind of gets into the slippery slope argument, and he kind of argues against that. I mean, those are the arguments that have been used against gay rights and marriage rights and civil rights and all sorts of other things. And that's not really what he's arguing for. He's arguing for kind of a very specific baby step. And if in the future, if our society kind of goes in a direction that wants to go way out there on that limb and in that direction, well, that's something else. But that's not really what he was arguing for. He was doing a very specific, limited argument in the beginning, that these certain animals, these great apes, should have some kind of legal right.
Absolutely. I mentioned earlier that the two of you are known for a very particular style of shooting documentaries. And I was wondering, in this film in particular, is your style of filmmaking something that enhanced your ability to capture this story, or were there any drawbacks at all? Anything that you wanted to do that you couldn't because you were sticking to this style?
Well, it's a style where you kind of live their lives with them, and you go through it, and you watch a person take a risk, kind of to perform some kind of life goal, some dream that they were trying to do. And what we try to do in our movies is kind of take you through that with the person, and see what it's like, and see what it's like for them. And see where they get to and how it changes them, how it tests them going through this process. And it's a long process, and this was a challenge for us because, it was a legal story, and I think in the beginning, if I knew how long cases took to go through the courts, I might not have done it. But, that was a real challenge. And it also was a challenge because as you go through the process, some of the plaintiffs die before Steve gets to his cases, and then it got more complicated because Steve decided he wasn't going to just argue for the one chimpanzee. He was going to argue for every chimpanzee in New York State, two of those, which were at Stony Brook University.
Right.
And, in some ways it made the film a lot richer, but it was difficult and challenging as storytellers to be able to kind of keep these threads of the story going and make it understandable for people.
Well, I think it's a very rich story. Another thing I just wanted to ask you in terms of filmmaking is I've heard in some cases that certain documentary filmmakers are against the concept of using score, using music. And this is The Sounds of Film, the radio show. And I did notice, particularly a couple key moments in your movie, there is some dramatic music, especially at those points, like when you're waiting to find out what the decision is going to be by the judge and such. And do you have, in general, strict rules in terms of how the two of you like to use music or not use music in movies?
I don't think we have many rules at all. I think each film is like a little adventure you go on, and you're not sure just where you'll go or what will happen and what you'll find, and that's kind of what makes it interesting to do. And sometimes, if you do a film with a musician or a concert, that's the music. You don't have to make anything up. It goes with the film. Sometimes you watch a person like Steve go about his life, which is complicated, and you kind of want to have some kind of filmmaking aspect, which one of which is musical accompaniment. Kind of I go with it. It's hard to say, but you just don't make up your mind until you get into the film, and then the film tells you what to do.
I think in a lot of our earlier films, we use music more as transition. I think Kings of Pastry, I used it a little bit more than that because I really loved the Django Reinhardt music that we were putting in the film.
Right.
And it was a French film.
And in this film, I think I just wanted to go a little further, and we actually worked with a composer, James Levino, on it, and it was a little bit of a new experience for me. But most documentaries are totally scored nowadays, and so it was just something to try.
Yeah,
our craft.
One more question about craft. We talked about how you like to follow around your subjects, and there's no straight head-on interviews. Why not just do interviews? What's the reasoning behind that?
I don't know. They always seem to me sort of artificial. I mean, when you ask people questions, and you've got a camera in your hand pointed at them, it doesn't make for a conversation. My sense is that film should always be as real as you can make it, and conversations, when they're real, tell you lots of things that you kind of are interested to hear. Conversations that are not real, you kind of turn off.
Yeah.
I think, because we're trying to follow people in their lives and not be the center of what's going on, but kind of just be in the background and watching them. A lot of times in the beginning we don't do interviews just so people don't get used to us doing interviews and think, okay, now I've talked to you, now go away. We want people to get a sense that no, we're going to be there with you for this journey. And then a lot of times it kind of takes you out of a scene, to be stopped by an interview, and it, just was a style we try to do if we can, but, I don't think we have any total rules, so, if we thought it was better to have an interview, I'm sure we'd put it in too, but I think, in terms of theater, and we're really trying to make theater, in a sense, and, give the audience a theatrical experience, that they experience it on the way and they form their own opinions, and I think that's easier if you're just watching what happens.
You're listening to The Sounds of Film. My name's Tom Needham, and our special guests today are Chris Hegedus and D.A. Pennebaker, legendary filmmakers. At the end of the movie, Devil's Advocate with Al Pacino, there's a brief scene at the end, I don't know if you're familiar with it, when the hero lawyer, played by Keanu Reeves of all people, falls from grace when he briefly has an encounter with a reporter who it ends up is really the devil, Al Pacino. And it's supposed to show that he, despite doing this heroic act in the film, that even he is swayed by vanity at the end, and that everyone is kind of open to that. This film reminded me of that a little bit. I don't know that it was necessarily your intent, but there are many scenes in this movie that show that when Stephen starts to have success with his court cases in his trial, he starts to get a lot of media attention. And then before you know it, he's on not only just a lot of news programs, but he's on like late night television and such. And I was wondering, what...
He's also written a couple of books.
Yeah.
Well written, wonderful books.
Yeah, and I was wondering, was there any kind of point that you were trying to make in showing this aspect of Stephen going on television? He seemed to enjoy it a lot, and I don't know that there's anything wrong with that, but or was it just that's what happened and that's the story, so you followed it?
Basically that's what happened. I mean, he was looking for publicity so that people would pay attention to his cases. That, I mean, the way that things are going to change is that they get into, people's cultural mindset about how they think about animals, and it's changed so much since we made this film. I mean, just yesterday, the Ringling Brothers Circus is not going to exist anymore, and last year they stopped having elephant acts. I mean, those are huge changes that happened during the making of this film, and I think people like Steve, there's Jane Goodall, of course. There are films like Blackfish, I mean, that slowly seep into people's minds, and they say, well, right, why do we treat animals like this? This shouldn't be the case. And, the internet itself is a huge driver. People make fun of, cat videos, but I think even just seeing how smart animals are in a lot of the videos that are posted on the internet start to change people's perspective on animals.
I think one of my interests in this film from the beginning was it had a sense of futurizing, and that our attitude toward animals isn't just changing, but probably in a few years, maybe in the next generation, people will stop eating animals just because it's very expensive.
Yeah.
And they're hard to raise. And we'll start eating imitation animals or vegetables or who knows what we'll eat, but people will get used to it and they won't think about it. But what will happen is try to figure out how animals think, how they work, what do they know, particularly about survival, and we'll look at animals quite differently.
I think locally, many people here on Long Island are going to be a little surprised if they didn't catch it in the news when the story first took place, that Stony Brook actually had some chimpanzees.
I know.
You know, and in the movie, you indicate that as soon as things started to turn in Stephen's favor with the court case, that the university was kind of taken back. They were surprised. What did you witness that, you know, maybe is totally not in the movie in terms of like what happened at Stony Brook University when this case really started to flare up?
Well, you know, I think that, you know, Stony Brook was using these two chimpanzees, Hercules and Leo, for these locomotion studies to show, you know, how chimpanzees walk upright. And, I mean, it was kind of a ridiculous study and one that had been done decades ago. As a matter of fact, since this is a film program, Frederick Wiseman, who is a contemporary of Penny here, a famous documentary filmmaker that many may know, he did a film called Primate, and in that study down at the Yerkes Center down in Atlanta, they were doing a locomotion study, the same study back then.
Oh, wow.
So it was bogus, and it went on for 5 years. These poor chimpanzees were there, and different animal groups had tried to release them at different points. And as a matter of fact, when the research, when people understood that Steve was going to mount this case for Stony Brook, and when he filed the papers and stuff, the scientists tried to speed up some of their research on Hercules and Leo, and Steve's group, the Non-Human Rights Project, actually did a FOIA and got some of the information about what they were doing at the time, and you know, they were hurrying up these research, and you know, they almost killed one of the chimpanzees in the process of doing it, and you know, it just was an incredibly sad thing. But the good thing was that they released the chimpanzees that were leased to Stony Brook back to a center in Louisiana where they came from. But unfortunately, the place where they came from was also kind of a horrific research center, which Steve and his group are trying to have Hercules and Leo moved from there, even though I don't think they're being subjects of research anymore. But he has places for them for the rest of their lives, and they're still very young chimpanzees. Chimpanzees live to be in their 60s, and these chimpanzees are probably about 8 years old now.
Oh, wow.
To the sanctuary in Florida, where they could live on islands for the rest of their lives with other chimpanzees. And unfortunately, the state of Louisiana that owns these chimpanzees, Hercules and Leo now, are really taking their time in moving them to a sanctuary. And I think the group is trying to mount some pressure on them to get them in a place where they should be.
Well, I think this movie is a great, dramatic, nail-biting thriller. It really is, and I think our audience is going to absolutely love this movie. We're talking about Unlocking the Cage. I'm so excited to be speaking to the two of you. As I mentioned earlier, the two of you have done so many films through the years that I really, really enjoy. And I know we don't have a lot more time. If I can just switch gears for 1 minute and just ask you about one other thing. I was just watching the other night on Netflix the documentary Get Me Roger Stone, which is a political documentary about Roger Stone, who worked on the Trump campaign. And I was thinking about your legendary film, The War Room, which was about, you know, when Carville and Stephanopoulos worked together to get Bill Clinton elected. And I was just wondering, you know, with everything that's going on today, in your opinion, how have things changed in politics since you made that movie, and how are things the same?
Well, in some ways, the changes have been very simple. Instead of telephoning people with a telephone or sending them a fax message cameraman immediately hears it and can hear what they're saying. So it's a little harder in a way to get close to people when they're doing something that's very serious for them, which is to say running for president or running for anything. So the idea of being able to film somebody when they're doing something that they don't think necessarily a home movie is going to be what they need, that's complicated, and but still people will do it. They'll find a way to do it, and I don't think that the concept will disappear. But in the old days, you know, in the war room, the whole idea of when that group moved into the White House, they found typewriters, and they were used to computers. So it was a big jump and the film kind of reflects that, because the people in it are a new breed of people who are used to a new kind of intellectual ferment.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the access is harder when, you know, people, you know, are talking about politics every second of the day, like you say, on the telephone. But, you know, and it makes, you know, back in the war room, it's almost like the dinosaur era or something. But, you know, I think that, you know, access is all important in terms of these films, but the news cycle is, you know, every second of the day by everyone now, and that's a very different thing. I mean, back then there were, you know, 3 networks and the fairly new CNN, and, you know, and that was it. So that everything went on news cycles. It's a very different world.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. You've made, the two of you, so many different films through the years, and D.A., one of the films that you're most often attached to is Don't Look Back with Bob Dylan, and you use a Dylan song at the end of this movie.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could just talk, our last question, what has Dylan meant to your career, and in particular, why did you choose this song that you used? I think it's I Shall Be Released.
Yeah. Well, it just seemed like a good song for the film, whether or not it was Dylan's even. It was, but you know, it's one of my favorite songs that he did when he was working with the
band.
The band, yeah. You know, I had worked at kind of learned how to make these films when I was working at Life magazine, and I kind of got to a point where I realized that I needed to be sort of free of any sort of higher command in order to try out and do a film on my own, totally on my own, that I wanted to do by myself. I didn't want to have any kind of group helping me edit it or helping me shoot it. I wanted it to be just like writing a novel, you know, and a kind of lonely, personal sort of thing, and that's what I was able to do when I did Don't Look Back. The camera was a camera that we had made ourselves, so it was very portable, and it was synchronous, which it was very important. And I could follow people around or be with people, and they didn't notice me. Because I was all by myself. Normally, when you were going to make a film with people, you brought in lights and sound things and all. It became a big production, and everybody had to pay attention and do what they were told. And in this way, they didn't have to pay any attention at all to me. So it allowed me to move around much easier, and in a way, that was the kind of what I was looking to try to have happen. And Dylan was interesting to me because in the beginning, I thought that Albert Grossman, who was his manager, wanted to make a film about the music that he was going to perform in England, so that he could, so that it would help maybe promote their, you know, the various concerts that he might going to be doing in the U.S. But after I spent a few days with him, I got interested in kind of the way he talked. And the conversations he had with people, and I thought this guy is something of a poet. He may not know it yet. He may be still trying to figure out what he is, but that's what I hear. And so I changed and did a different kind of film. I had very little of the music. It was not a music film, although I did use some of his songs. And that was kind of what I set out to do. And it was sort of interesting because Dylan has become something of a cause in our culture. People are all wonder, who is this Dylan? Why is he still around? What is he up to? And that's interesting when you have a film at the beginning of his career.
And it's a valuable film at that, and it's one that people keep on going back to try and find answers. Chris and D.A., I want to thank you so much for joining me today on The Sounds of Film. I hope that we can speak again, because you have many other films that are just as important that I'd love to talk to you about. But I want to recommend to all of our listeners, please check out Unlocking the Cage, directed by Chris Hegedus and D.A. Pennebaker. And it's available on First Run Features DVDs and on
HBO.
And on HBO, right.
HBO, right.
So thank you again, Chris and D.A. It was really a pleasure speaking with you. And
thank you so much for your interest in it.
Yeah, we thank you, because that's, in the end, you make these films, you can't just put them in a box.
All right, well, thanks again, and have a great night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.